So in this set of lessons on pages 14 and 15, there's quite a few different things that we're going to go over here. So I'll try to talk fast so we can get through it pretty quick. So there's 6 skills, and I'm going to start with the first one, and it's renaming decimals as percent. So basically what that means is we're going to switch something from a decimal to a percent. Very, very quick and easy. In order to do that, we just take this decimal place and move it over 2, and we're done. So it ends up being 75%. If I have 20.27, changing it to a decimal or a percent is 27%. Okay, the one that gets students a little bit confused is when we have 2.27. Same rule, move it over 2 decimals and you have 227%. Now don't ask me what 227% is, because 100% means all of it. So I'm not really sure what 227% is. Even as a math teacher, it just didn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but that's what you do there. Now if we're going to switch back, which would be skill 5, so I'm going to jump ahead a little bit, we're just going to move the decimal place to the left 2. So again, if we have 83%, the decimal is known to be right here. It's assumed to be there. And we're, in order to change 83% to a decimal, we're going to go over to the other direction. Okay, so to change a decimal to a percent, we move the decimal 2 over to the right. To move it from a percent to a decimal, we move it to the left. Okay, nothing really, no real good trick. One of the things I did teach is when you have a percent, pretend your decimal's up here and it's going downhill. So it slides clear over to here. I've got 2 little circles here, so that tells you how many it slides across. That's the only way I've really even taught the whole idea of some kind of a tip in order to get that. All right, so let's look at skill number 2, renaming fractions as percent. So if I have 1/5 and I want to write that as a percent, actually what that means is 5 divided by 1. Okay, so a fraction, this is free information. A fraction is really just a division. 1 divided by 5. So remember what I said in the last lesson? 1 divided by sign, 5. And then you divide it out. Okay, but most of you are going to use a calculator. And when you use a calculator for 1 over 5, 1 divided by 5 is going to end up being 0.20. And a lot of books like this. I know I like this. If there's no number in front of the decimal, put a 0 there just to show that you didn't leave something off. All right, so that's the decimal. That's changing 1/5 to a decimal, 1 divided by 5. And if you want that as a percent, then just like we did in skill number 1, we move the decimal over 2 to the right, and it becomes 20%. So 1/5 is the same as 0.20, which is the same as 20%. So 3 ways to write that fraction. So let's see, looks like that's pretty much all there is for skill 2. Let's go to skill 3, renaming percents as decimals. So if we have, I need a pencil here, 30%, and we did it up here. We're going to change that to a decimal. The decimal is assumed to be there. We're going to move it over 2, and it ends up being 0.30. And like I said, it's a good idea to put that 0 in front there. Now what if I have a 3%? And I want to change that to a decimal. Well, my assumed decimal is still here, and I move it over 1, 2, and it goes there. But there's nothing here. If there's nothing here, I put a 0 there. So 3% is the same as 0.03. Okay, let's look at that just for a second. 43% is the same as 0.43. That's a funny 3. All right, so renaming percents as fraction. This is skill number 4. Get this out of the way. Renaming percents as fractions. So if I have 80%, this is just another tip here. You can really not do anything if something is written in a percent, because you either have to change it to a fraction or change it to a decimal. You cannot multiply 80% by anything, add it, divide it, anything. You have to change it to a decimal or a fraction first, and then it's usable. That's why you need to learn how to do this. So 80% is a fraction. Well, we're going to change it to a decimal first. If you change it to a decimal first, it means it's going to be 1, 2, it's going to be 0.80. Okay, the 8, since there's a 0 at the end, we can kind of cross that out. That doesn't really matter. So we have 0.8. And that 8 is in what position? It's in the tenths position. It's just like when you have 243. The 3 is in the ones, the 4 is in the tens, the 2 is in the hundreds. That's why you say 243. On the other side of the decimal point, you have a 2, which when you're over here, this is the ones place. Well, when you're on the right-hand side, you start with the tenths place. So this is the tenths place, this is the hundreds, thousands, 10,000s, etc. Okay, so this 0.8 is in the tenths place. So all we have to do is take the decimal off, put it over a 10, we have it as a fraction, and we reduce our fraction to 4/5. Okay? A lot of students will take something like 23% and just put it over a 1 with this many zeros. And now it's a fraction. So you can do that as well. If we did the 80%, take off the percent sign, put it over 1 with 2 zeros, 8 and 0. Then that reduces to 8 over 10, which reduces to 4 over 5, which is the same as we got up there. So either way is correct. Either way works. Okay, so let's get this out of the way. So skill number 5 gets a little bit tricky. And it says there we can write any percent as a decimal. Because remember what I said a minute ago, if it's written as a percent, you really can't use it. You've got to change it as to a decimal first. So the question there for, let me get black here, for skill 5 is find 40% of 19. So that means I've got to do some math. Well, I can't do any math because that's in a percent, so I've got to change that first. So let's change it to a percent first, and one of the ways, or to a decimal first. So one of the ways I said to do it was to take that number and write it here over a 1 with this many zeros. There's 2 numbers here, so we're going to put 2 zeros. And that equals 20 over 50. I'm just kind of reducing it slowly. 10 over 25, or 5, whoops, or 2 over 5. Okay, so I just kind of reduced it slowly, and I need to change my 2, so it actually looks like a 2 here. Okay, so 40% is 2/5. That's if I change it to a decimal. If I want to change it to, or I mean a fraction, if I want to change it to a decimal, 40%, remember, decimal's there. To take the percent sign off, I move this over 2, and I have 0.40 as a percent. Now I can find 40% of 19. An of sign, whenever you're dealing with story problems, the of symbol always means multiply. So this says 40% times 19, or 0.40 times 19. So then I take my 19 times 40. It doesn't matter which one goes on the top. 19 times 0.40 or 0.40 times 19. So let's do it this way. I'm going to do my 9 times 0, and I'm going to get 0. Then I'm going to take my 1 times 0, and I'm going to get 0. Then I'm going to take my 9 times 4, and I'm going to get 36, carry the 3. Then I'm going to take my 1 times 4 is 4, add that 3, and that'll give me 7. 0, 6, 7. And my decimal point is 1, 2 over. So I'm going to put it 2 over here. So my decimal point is going to end up being there, and that ends up being my answer there. Okay, one more here in skill 6. On the right hand side it says 3/4 times 16. We're just going to multiply 3/4 times 16 and see what that looks like. It's really hard to multiply fractions if one is a fraction and one is not. So we're going to make this one a fraction by putting it over 1. You can take any whole number and make it into a fraction just by putting it over 1. So multiplying fractions, if you remember, you take the top two numbers and multiply, and the bottom two numbers and multiply, and you keep the line between them. So 3 times 6 is 48. See how nice it is to know your multiplication tables. 4 times 1 is 4. 48 over 4 reduces to 12, and you're done there. So 3/4 times 16 is 12, or 3/4 of 16. 75% of 16 is 12. So if you have 16 cupcakes and your brother eats 3/4 of them, that means he ate 12, and he didn't leave you with a whole lot left. Okay, so that's it for that section over fractions, decimals, and percents.